So I want to welcome all of you to the last Media Psychology Colloquium for 2022. Sean Thoennes has graciously agreed to be our presenter for this colloquium. Sean has a telecom degree from the University of Florida. He has a PhD from our own media psychology program at Fielding Graduate University. He served on Fielding's Board of Trustees and in leadership positions in Division 46 for the American Psychological Association. Sean has been teaching and continues to teach for our media psychology program, and he also taught for the UCLA Extension. Sean authored a book on AI, and today he's graciously offered to share his 30 plus years of experience in the next 40 minutes or so. So Sean, let me turn it over to you, and we're all really looking forward to what you have to say.
Well, thank you, Brian. I am really appreciative to be given this opportunity, first off, because this is something that I have mulled over in my head. How do I express what I have been through these years? And I don't mean it's traumatic. It's just an experience. And I'm gonna ask that if you could help me by giving me the ability to share the screen so I can show the
of course,
PowerPoint that I've created. Hang on 1 second while I can. Okay. I need to select the right screen to share here. And should be seeing my notes up there right now in the PowerPoint. Do you see it?
We do.
Okay, great. All right, so the Disney MGM Studios in 1989 was going to be Hollywood East. And you can see up there the world's largest hidden Mickey. It kind of led all of us to join this place, even though that look at the check there. I wanted you to pay attention to the overtime that was going on. 90 hours of overtime, and after taxes, that's what you got. That's kind of how it started. And even back in that day, that wasn't a lot. There was this gathering of Disney files and people who loved Hollywood and stars, and I was one of them. I finished up the University of Florida there and came down afterwards and began as a backstage studio tour guide because they told me, hey, you'll be right next to the action. They didn't tell me there's gonna be a glass between me and the action, and I still was young, and had a great time joining the team. I want to make first that disclaimer, and then the other, that this is gonna feel like it might be an indictment, and it's not, because some of the things that I'm talking about, like this check here, the overtime that we put in, the little amount of money that we were paid, it has to be understood that there was a contract that we paid when we went into Disney. We understood Disney is a place where everybody wants to work, and continue to understand that. And that kept me there for many years, in addition to having kids, and needing that sort of security. That said, I'm going to say that Disney does not often pay its people well. There are people who live in their cars in the parking lot at times, and that does not jive well with me. So now I'm going to start in the middle, of course. In 2006, I went to Fielding for the first time, and I happened to overhear a couple of guys in the place where I was laying over, and they were wizard-looking guys, and they were talking about bias, and their work was in epistemology and how do you remove bias and so on and so forth. And because my teenage kids weren't old enough to really demand my attention all the time, so I felt pretty confident and cocky as a father, and confident and cocky as a newly initiated person into the world of academia, where someone would have me and walking around with my Disney pedigree, I jumped into their conversation and said, well, can you really remove bias? And they, of course, looked at each other and chuckled and said, there you go. I got to Fielding and discovered that they were two of the founding members of Fielding. One of them, John Gladfelter, and the other, William something, whose name I cannot remember. I wish I could. But that was quite embarrassing. They embraced me nonetheless, and it was an exciting moment to be able to gain that insight from them. And with that in mind, I want to say that this is a longitudinal case study with a quasi-experimental design using eyewitnesses, mainly me. In other words, it's biased. And my hypothesis, this is just, so that you guys can kind of get an idea where I'm going with everything, is that Disney theme parks are department stores fed by their media empire. This is where we are now. This is our award-winning department at Disney. You see the people on this page. I worked with all of them back at the beginning and in the middle there at the parks, doing things like Great Movie Ride, the Backstage Studio Tour, Epic Stunt Theater, and we all had the ambition to get out and do things. You can see Jay Hatcher up there at the top left. He worked at Great Movie Ride. He's getting an Emmy right there. Those Emmys that you see on the shelf, along with the Addies and other awards, sat right outside my office. And that's the most I can say about them. No, I did not go to the award ceremony and win those. Hatch was really good. That's his nickname. Hatch was really good at getting, the applications to get the awards. And this is the inside scoop on awards. You don't get them if you don't apply for them. I didn't know that. So when I was the boss, and by the way, 3 people who you're going to see in these pictures today were once people who were on my team, and they eventually became my boss before I left, each one of them. So the thing is that we had methods and modes of moving up at Disney, and that's really a positive thing. It just is really important, and I think this is true with most places. Trajectory is a very important thing, and any particular leader can immediately change that trajectory and step on it or advance it. And that's the kind of the direction we're going here. I'm going to examine some of the leadership that we've had through the years for Disney corporate. These are the leaders who would matter most to you and you would recognize most. But there are far more leaders on the local level that made a huge impact on my life, because the things that I did were under the radar. And I would work on my breaks to develop an entire business within Disney that would eventually become this department that you're looking at by merging with another section. And in the process of doing that, I didn't follow the rules. There's a picture on that center bottom. There's a picture of a guy named James Manis to the middle right, and you can barely make him out. James used to tell me, Sean, he had a long way of saying things in a Tennessee accent, and he would say, Sean, you always try to do the right thing. Your problem is you just don't know how to do them right. And that landed me as an hourly worker for my entire career at Disney. Even when I was doing managerial work and leadership work, I was still an hourly worker, because the things that I was introducing were not a part of the Disney departmental procedures. So process was huge, and I was not very good at process. And I still struggle. It's just, me. And, I'm going to introduce you to some leaders that have that same issue, and they had partners, as I did, who helped them through that. Now let's take a look at this video. It's going to show you what it was in general that we did. And it's a quick thing we did back in 2016. So if you wouldn't mind hitting pause. Thank you, Brian, for pausing that. We can start recording again. Going back to the beginning, now that we've seen the middle, Walt and Roy were a pair in this process. And Roy was the balance to Walt's impulsivity and his recklessness in terms of mortgaging his own house and such to finance his dreams. But bottom line is that without Roy, there would be no Disney. Without Roy, there would be no Disney World. Without Roy, there'd be no Walt Disney World for sure, because he named it Walt Disney World after Walt passed. And the thing about what Walt and Roy accomplished is that they went mainstream with it. You know, they brought it to America. He was reinventing the theme park. He was reinventing and repackaging the animated feature, because before Walt and Roy came along, there was Charlotte Reiniger, and she created the precursor to the multiplane camera that Walt is given credit for inventing it. Ab Iwerks, by the way, is the technical genius who worked with Walt, and that was 10 years before Walt set up shop and put together Snow White. Lot Reiniger created the first animated feature that we know of, and I put down here at the bottom that she was a woman from Berlin in the 1920s and not a man from Hollywood, and that, I believe, was the difference. We, myself and 3 colleagues at Fielding, Jerry Lindhog, Gary Hare, and Shane Pace, founded a company called the Lot Project, where it was intended to honor women in tech and use the emerging technology to reconnect public spaces to people with their mobile devices and give agency to those who were connected to the memorial. My father's name is on the Vietnam Memorial. We used that to create a prototype, you know, to activate stories behind these names and to connect new generations to these names on these memorials. And the stories are at the center point of Disney's wealth, you know, his abilities, his leveraging, was the idea that we could take these stories and use them to pull people together, to pull people into these movie theaters and into these theme parks and connect these generations. And he began to think of it in terms of a cradle to grave kind of approach in terms of the business end of Disney. The problem with that was these kinds of stories, these fairy tales, were intended as advice from mothers to daughters, and they were very malleable. So if you had something going on in your life, you pulled out the tale of Snow White and you put whatever you wanted into that story that you shared with your daughter. And it changed through the years to be meaningful and personal. And then when Disney created, and I would argue Lot Reiniger created these movies, when they became mainstream, it was written more in stone. So we had taken a medium that was of oral storytelling and etched it into stone to a different medium. And as we know from Marshall Lewin, the medium is the message. That meant that our Disney princesses began to matter in America, and they began to change the way the world saw the West and the American propaganda that we were pushing out there. We were westernizing the world. Walt died before he saw Disney World. And he came over here, you know, made the deal and everything, but he died before it happened. And Roy finished the work and renamed the park in his honor. It would be Roy E. Disney that bridged the gap between the partnership of Walt and Roy to the partnership of Frank Wells and Michael Eisner. Frank Wells and Michael Eisner were brought in by Roy to save the company, not because the company was like failing, but because there was too much cash lying around. And so at that time, I don't know if many remember or know about the 80s, but it was filled with corporate raiders who were buying and dividing up companies and making a chunk of change off of it with little regard for whether the company survived or not or honored its mission. Eisner did wonderfully at that. He was the Walt of the pair, and he would just spend like crazy. And one of those things that he spent on was the Disney MGM Studios. And he did that by taking plans for, the plans that he was aware of. I don't want to make it like he stole the idea, but there were rumors at that time that he stole the ideas from Paramount, where he came from, and placed them into the Disney MGM Studios. MGM is on there because we Disney, because I don't know Disney, bought the rights to MGM to use their movies. Immediately after opening, they were doing productions, and as such, when they began doing productions, MGM sued for $100 million. That was one of the things that is a legacy of Eisner. Roy, I'm sorry.
Thanks for calling.
I'm sorry, did someone have a question?
No, I think we're good to go.
Oh, I'm sorry, Brian. I thought I heard something. But Roy revitalized Disney animation by bringing in Jeffrey Katzenberg, who created an animation department at the Disney MGM Studios in Florida, which I worked right next to and worked in many, many times. And there's a long history there. But unfortunately, Roy was killed. I mean, not Roy, sorry. Frank was killed in a helicopter accident. And then it was just Eisner. And you'll see this page just covered with stars, because this is what we did. We shoved stars in everywhere, and he pulled in all these favors from the studios he worked, and gave credibility to the studios so this is where Hollywood East is going to be. So there was this great sheen, this great polish over it that made people believe that this was the next place. Well, I will tell you what ended the production in Central Florida. It didn't end it, but it really put a dent in it. Love bugs. When they came out and they were shooting at different places, the camera equipment would get gummed up by love bugs. And I mean, there's all kinds of reasons why Central Florida is not the best place to work on location, namely that it's a paved swamp in some places, but also these bugs. I mean, who would have thought? Tim Burton swore he would never come back and do work there again after doing Edward Scissorhands in Tampa. But we did do production there, including From the Earth to the Moon. I still have the filing cabinet that was used in the big control room scene in my house, and gotten legally, by the way, so we're good there. But the thing with Eisner is that without the regulator of Frank Wells, and without the ability to set his ego aside and bring in a partner or someone to replace him, as Jeffrey Katzenberg was assumed to be because he had so much success with animation, he had a lot of missteps, and you can see them listed here, including Disney Institute, which was failing from the beginning. It had to revamp as a resort eventually, and Euro Disney, which is now Disneyland Paris, was a awful failure at first, and Disney had to sell a portion of their ownership to some Saudi prince. And then there was an attempt to build a theme park on a Virginia heritage site, which was really kind of short-sighted. And he alienated Jeffrey Katzenberg by not promoting him and mentoring him, and that created SKG, which is a huge competitor against Disney animation when Shrek came out, and Farquaad is supposedly a mimicry of Michael Eisner. A lot of this infighting going on. And MGM eventually won their $100 million lawsuit over production work at the studios. That is believed to be, even though that's not the official reason, that is believed to be the reason why they changed the name to Disney's Hollywood Studios in an attempt to continue producing out there, because the MGM argued that we never agreed to produce things out there. So even that failed, because eventually they stopped doing production work at all out there, and Iger just called it what it was, turned it into a theme park, stopped with bringing stars to sort of polish over it. And then there was the failed purchase of Muppets after Jim Henson passed away. And Jim Henson passing away was a huge shock to all of us. He was somebody who was a constant presence on the lot and was well loved by everyone who worked around him. Even us lowly tour guides, he would come up and bring water out to us and stuff because they didn't have water for us. But the generational re-releases of Disney animated movies, movies to the home through VHS resulted in a dilution of the brand, because now you had people out there. I mean, my daughter, she knew the songs, Beauty and the Beast, because it was on automatic rewind, and she was singing it to me at 2 years old. And I was, oh, that's on me. So yeah, we began to raise our kids on VHS at that point. Now, I was asked to cut jobs at some point, and they wanted to do a 15-minute a day, speech by the vice president, who was a very intelligent, great guy, but he had a very thick accent. He's from the Netherlands, and he talked very monotone. So I gave him a pitch, and I said, "Hey, man, why don't you try this instead?" Of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I got 5 people working for me that I want to keep busy. So here we go. Let's do this. And if you wouldn't mind pausing again here. And also, this is the inside cut, not that. But I did lose my position, because what happened was in order to get this pitch out, the person who I reported to was on vacation. So I had to go in there and talk to the vice president, who I had been in the past free to do so. No one had questioned that. And I worked directly for the vice president. In reality, on paper, there were all these steps that you were supposed to go through, and people you report through to do that. So I did that, and unfortunately, my partner went in there with me just because she wanted to show her support, and we were both sent, quote unquote, back to the parks. We were sent to Who Wants to Be a Millionaire Play It, which ordinarily people would go, "Wow, that's great." Not so much, because we're trying to create something here, business, and this was our baby. But that's what happens. That's what happens in these spaces where you create something. The show ran for 11 years. That's how successful it was. And I eventually did go back to it. My partner never did, because she was, hey, I'm done there. I'm going on doing my own thing. And I had to eat crow to go back and work there, because it fit with being able to go back to school. And that's what I did as I went back to school. And I was going to show them I was going to be done in no time, and I was going to quit, and I was going to be big and huge. It took about 8 years. So we moved on from there, obviously. Now we move on to the Bobs. The Bobs would be Bob Iger and Bob Chapek, the most recent leaders here at Disney. I'll tell you full disclosure, Bob Iger was a huge question mark when he first came in, and was much beloved by the time he left. He allowed areas to manage their own space. He was somebody who had a very easygoing manner. The leaders that he put in those local spaces were very accessible, and showed an ability to care. The great thing about my role, even though it was an hourly role, I was very much involved with executive communications. And so I was constantly in the room. And when I would see these people interacting with one another, it was a very quick thing to measure up the person on the other side of the conference room table. And I have a lot of respect for a lot of them. And like any family, there is dysfunction. And so we kind of navigate this space at Disney in the same way, all the while understanding that the goal is we're a business. So we have to make money in this. We have to keep getting things that build the company so it doesn't get taken over. And I have this in here, this part about Pixar, Iger buying Pixar, because he begins to buy brands. He begins to buy these massive brands. And you can see Steve Jobs back there holding the iPod. And I wanted to point out that the successful people in today's marketplace aren't inventing. We haven't seen a lot of inventions over the last 100 years. We've seen a lot of reinventions, and that includes, Tesla. There was electric cars 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. The MP3, that was out quite some time before Steve Jobs decided to make an iPod. And these are things that happen over and over again. And Iger acquired things like Pixar, Hulu, National Geographic, Marvel, Fox Studios, Lucasfilm, and so on. And I got to work with these places. In fact, before I left there, I applied to be a producer at National Geographic, which is, I wanted to work for National Geographic. That's why I got in this business to begin with. And I thought, oh, great, I'm going to be working at Disney still. But the funny thing is everything on the list, I checked off all the marks, for years and years of experience of the thing that I was moving over to. So it was more of a lateral move. And I got this, form letter from my resume saying that unfortunately you don't have the experience we're looking for. So take that for what it's worth. But I was also once an intern at some place where I set aside resumes that had Oscars on them. And you just don't know the process that's going behind it and the whys or wherefores. But I do know I have the experience for it. Let's see. Oh, and Elon Musk, his SpaceX, it's wonderful, but it's still rocket technology. I just wanted to make that clear that we're looking at a long period of time where we haven't had any really huge breakthroughs. We've used old technologies to create new things. When we come across times like the Iger years, for example, we're still faced with managing money because we're buying these immense properties, even though they bring in a lot of money. We don't have ways to suddenly create the money without diluting the brand like we did during the Eisner years. We took our own brand and diluted it. Goal here is not to do that. The goal here is to make ours a desirable brand. And that's why you have Star Wars having that land built up. We have Toy Story land now at the studios. You have these, these movies that are coming in and becoming attractions at the theme parks, these synergistic relationships. And by buying these other intellectual properties, you widen the brand and you create a larger demographic that you're bringing in. And I'll discuss more of how that got undercut in just a minute. I'm going to play for you something that we put together because to save that money in the bottom line, you instead remember that your cast and crew are working on these things. They don't demand money. They just want to be thanked and they need to have a reason to move forward. So if you could just pause it one in here. And it's of me inside a crowd of everybody that's ever worked at the studios at that time. So I was like way in the back. I just wanted proof that I worked there. It wouldn't have given you proof, but it was funny. Now, here we are buying all this stuff. And this is what you end up with. You have this mash, no pun intended, mashup of all these different properties. And what are you going to do with it? How are you going to make it feel like it belongs in one family? Iger was a master of that. He really understood that you don't have to force the groups together. You allow these spaces to work the way they've always functioned, and then you invite them to the Thanksgiving table. As long as they can be what they want to be at the Thanksgiving table. Bob Chapek is the other Bob in this formula, and he was like somebody who, again, my opinion entirely. This is my relationship with him. He was like somebody who was late for a tea time. He was always kind of shifting, looking here and there during presentations or award ceremonies. Wasn't really engaged, but he would make sure to give a wave and say goodbye to everybody and thank him before he left the room. And that was kind of the style of Bob Chapek. And then he would disappear into his office or the golf course, whichever the case was, and he would issue proclamations. And a lot of that came at a very difficult time. To be fair to Bob Chapek, it's the pandemic, right? So here he is. He's coming in when his cash cow has been cut to practically nothing. And Florida had the largest single site employment space at Walt Disney World, with, I believe the number was around 78,000 at its height. And he had to manage that, quickly and respond to the fact that here he had created, or not created, but he was inheriting these department stores of Disney theme parks, where we have a gate, we've created a desire, we've created wanting people come in here so much so into this department store that they're going to pay money to get into it. And we've created all these other attractions and stuff to keep them in the department store to buy food and to buy sundriest things, because they want that stuff to take home with them. And then they want to get it for gifts. And then they want to bring their kids and their grandkids. And we have a cradle to grave model that works, where we're constantly selling. And it's under such demand that they can raise the price to practically whatever they want, and people will still come. And, you don't believe me? Go check the lines out. I believe it was the last over here. Look at the Slinky Dog Dash standby line, 300 minutes from that point. So, when the crowds began to return, this, by the way, the picture behind here is of Disney's Enchantment on Main Street, and that's the last big thing that I did while I was working there. I was responsible for curating all the animation that would go onto the projection up and down Main Street and on the castle. And the great thing about that is I got to turn to my kids, who are fully grown now, but I got to ask them, what's your favorite movie? And I'd figure a way to work it into the storyline. And they've all got something up there that's for them. So Bob Chapek took the chance to reorganize and cut labor. And, here's the thing. This was short-sighted in that in the past, I'll take Meg Crofton as an example, the president of Walt Disney World at the time during the recession. Rather than cut people, she expanded the construction at that time and built New Fantasyland. So New Fantasyland, which is now not New Fantasyland, it's just expanded Fantasyland, was a direct result of a downturn in the economy. And instead of using that model, Bob Chapek decided to get as much return to the shareholders as possible, as quickly as possible, by cutting labor, or at least creating the environment where labor would want to cut itself. And that's the case where I sit. This model is an Eisner style model. It's not that Eisner did that, but it's short-sighted. And that led to a lot of the stakeholders in Disney to begin to question, not the shareholders, but the stakeholders, namely the people who work for Disney, those people who are loyal to Disney, who are Disney loyalists for years and years and years, who can no longer afford to come. And then, of course, in political arena, you have Ron DeSantis with a friendly legislator passing things that attack the gay community in Florida. It was an intention to rile up his base, and Bob Chapek did not have the ability to provide a strong response or a cogent response to that. And we, as a group, I was a part of a committee within Disney, where, a diversity and inclusion committee, where we talked about these things. And in fact, even among the group, because I wasn't part of leadership at that time, I didn't have any fear. So I spoke up and I said, hey, you guys got to pay attention to this law that they're passing, the act that they're passing. And no one else was talking about it. I don't know why, but my assumption is that people were treading lightly because there were a lot of unknowns about Bob Chapek. They didn't know where he stood. But then now we see after the election, we see that particularly with the Reedy Creek Improvement District, where DeSantis decided that, that was going to be dissolved, but that would hurt Florida taxpayers. He might run for president. So we're not going to talk about that anymore. We're beginning to see a more return to normalcy. And that's something that I think that Bob Iger would have managed better. Now, well, I mean, I've covered all this. This is the pandemic outcome and outgo. You can see the size of the room with the one person in the office, and you see the balloons over there. That's my pal Paul right there. We're all packing up and leaving, and working freelance now. And you can see the picture. That's the original Studio News crew right there. Not the original, but the main one that got back together before we left. Paul's next to me, Dan's behind me, Tom's behind me, and then that's Melissa off to my right. The three guys, because Melissa went to academics, she's actually running a film program up in Tennessee, but they are all different bosses to me at one point, and I was their boss at one point. That's the way we roll. But you know, we were trying to reinvent the business model, and now Chapek was reinventing the business model that we had created that formed this very strong department, and trying to get rid of people without going through a weak union. So he said, you need to go back to the parks and we'll call you when we need you. They obviously need us because they're hiring everybody freelance, except me. I've left. And when we get to this point and people are coming back for pandemic, I'm going to play this real quick. I see we're coming to the last few slides and coming to the end now. This is what I call heartstrings, or what it was told to me was heartstrings, because I did something about 20, almost 30 years ago, and they've asked me to re-update it every so often. But basically, it takes letters that are sent to Disney World, and they said, here's some letters, make something. So I made this, and this is the most recent update that I did to it, though it's probably been remade by somebody else at this point.
Sean, should I pause for this?
You can, no, yeah, you should probably pause, because there's a few people on here. That's how we break down the resolve of our cast. And we try to bring them back to you matter. And one of the greatest experiences that I had working there was working with Make-A-Wish. And I was really nervous the first time I went in there to shoot. And I thought, oh gosh, I can't handle this. I've got young kids, you know. Ugh. And I got there and I left on just walking on air. Those kids lifted you up, you know. They were the most grounded human beings you'd ever meet, and were far beyond where I was emotionally. And this was kind of an homage. This particular video was an homage to those kids when I did it. Iger, he's back. Jason Zucker, a friend of mine, did this. You'll notice there are many things. There's Mickey sadly sitting next to Kermit when saying, I know how you feel, when Jim Henson dies. There's all these great animated things that have been done over the years to express in a picture how we feel. And this one does a great job. On the day that it was announced that Iger was coming back, I received so many texts from people back at work saying, woohoo! You know, there's so many celebrations going on here. And they were posting on Facebook, all this kind of stuff that you just do not see, putting things out there, because, you know, you got to be careful who you're mean to on your way up, because you're sure going to see them on your way back down again. And clearly this was a move that pleased at least the cast members. And I certainly hope that translates into something better, but it looks good. It looks good because even though Iger is a big IP buyer and all that kind of stuff, again, he has a good Thanksgiving Day table, and he, you know, he brings a sense of normalcy and belief that someone's going to support us. And by us, I mean the general us, all stakeholders of Disney. First thing he said was he thinks prices are too high for theme parks, because this is a place that's meant for family. He understands the long-term significance of, you know, it sounds morose, but cradle to grave demographics. And I found this and just threw it up there. because now, just gonna let you read it for a little bit. And if you got a video, you can pause it when you go back to it. And if anybody's interested in the videos, you're certainly welcome to reach out to me, and I will share them privately. It's nothing we can put out there publicly. Probably are out there publicly. In fact, a lot of the work that we've done in marketing, if you see Disney marketing, that's also other work that we've done. But you can see that Iger has done a lot of things in these purchases and growth. And then you can see the predictions for the future, which are a little more tongue-in-cheek. But let's return now. Let's return to where I started. And this is where I'm going to wrap it. Disney leverages its century of storytelling practice to sell its goods. And I think we're agreed on that. The media are means to an end, and Disney utilizes as many types as possible. And they are moving into the AR and VR space and artificial intelligence and robotics. Well, they've been in robotics with animatronics for years, but even more so. Synergy between departments ensure the brand is protected, and it's a multi-generational closed loop. So the company entices broad demographics to crave transmedial experiences within the Disney universe. And they do this by creating a multiverse of highly successful branded narratives that keep one immersed in the story, inevitably buying with regularity the products on offer. And that is the Disney department story. The end. So with that, I will field any kind of questions, and I will return sharing. Or you can, or how do I stop this sharing? There we go, got it.
Thank you, Sean.
Sure thing.
That was fantastic.